RWBY Volume 3, Episode 6, Fall. Now, this episode required a lot of weird little research because after I watched the episode, which was way earlier today, I just didn't get to do the review until now, which is like 4 o'clock in the morning, so I still won't get to upload it tonight. But I was watching this and then I read some comments and stuff. There was a lot of stuff going on with, our ending fight scene as far as what the heck happened, whose ability was that. There was a lot of question as to whether or not it was actually Mercury that did it or if maybe Emerald was somehow responsible, and there's some stuff in their former fight with Koko and Yatsuhashi that I had to go back and watch. So I just watched the episode again just to kind of refresh myself in case there are any little specifics that I might miss. And I went back to, I believe it was episode 4 when they fought. And yeah, episode 4, Lessons Learned. And I was going through, and this episode as a whole was very amazing. It's definitely one of my favorite episodes, and I think that says a lot after this whole, volume that we've had. We've had all these amazing fights. We finally, after all of Volume 2, we're finally at the festival. It's straight up, here's the festival arc that was kind of mentioned way back in Volume 1, and now that's all we have. Little bits of story elements here and there, mostly, those couple of scenes with Cinder, and now this episode in particular, we got a huge, just chunk of information about the overarching story, which was great. And it says a lot that this was one of my favorite episodes. I think it might be my favorite episode so far. And, like I said, we've had such amazing fights, but this one, just tension-wise, was insanely great, because all I was wondering is what's going to happen with Pyrrha. Like, is it, one of the big things was, like, was that even Pyrrha? Because it seemed like she kind of had sort of a weird evil grin and stuff. It turns out to actually be Pyrrha, and we find out all this crazy information about Guardians and, like, this fairy tale of the 4 seasons and these 4 women who are actually real. And it's this crazy old fairy tale that's actually, used to exist. These 4 women, they still exist, but it used to be common knowledge. But of course, people who were evil would go after these 4 women, and basically the last person you think about would, pretty much, that's who inherits the power. So I thought it was pretty great to get all this exposition. It was pretty much Exposition City, but I was totally fine with that because it's one of those things, we get more information out of just random stuff happening than we do out of sheer exposition. So oddly enough for RWBY, it's fine to have like just full exposition where they just say, here's exactly what this is, because we don't get that very often. We get it more out of the World of Remnant episodes than we have, 3 full volumes of the show. So I was totally fine with that happening. It was very tense. It kind of scares me because it's like, I'm assuming they won't change Pyrrha, but I'm so scared that they will, because to be totally honest, we don't know Pyrrha enough. Like, period. We just don't know Pyrrha nearly as much as we know, like our 4 main characters. And that's the same with every other character. Everyone's had their moments. Penny has had like very minor stuff, and really it's mostly like Jean and Pyrrha from Team Juniper. We get like, Ren, he hasn't really had anything, and Nora hasn't really had much either. She's had like her action scenes, and Ren had his thing in like Volume 1, and that was during the explanation of what Aura really was. So that's really about all we've gotten out of those 2. But I feel like, I think I want to see the most out of Pyrrha, even more than Jean, really, outside of finally, seeing what his semblance is going to end up being. But we don't know enough about her for them to do this crazy experiment, and then she actually does change. And if she does, then I'd be fine as long as she came back just as normal Pyrrha at some point. I'd be totally fine with that. But it has me a little worried. I'm like, it's like there's no guarantee this will work, and there's no guarantee you'll be the same. And it freaked me out. Like, they can't, give Pyrrha such an epic moment and then be like, if this works, you could basically be someone different. I'm like, that kind of hurts me a little bit, because I don't, I like Pyrrha a lot, and I really don't want her to change. I doubt that'll happen. I'm sure it'll ultimately work out fine, and she'll somehow be on like, God status, which I don't even know how to comprehend that for a show like this where people can clone themselves and, do the stuff that they do. Like, we have a character who basically goes Super Saiyan. Don't know how you get more God status than crazy stuff like that. So whatever that means, I'm looking forward to seeing it. But I'm not 100% sure what to really expect from, but I'm looking forward to however that plays out. And now, we have our final singles matches, which I knew for sure. I knew we were gonna get Yang versus Mercury. I'd been talking about that ever since, I don't know, maybe like the third episode, or I think the fourth episode since we saw them fight. I was like, they're gonna go to the singles, and we're gonna get to see Mercury versus Yang, because it just made perfect sense. Fist fighter, foot fighter. That's You just have to have them go against each other, and it just made perfect sense. So we finally got to see that. We got to see, I believe, 3 other new characters. One was basically Robin Hood, the other guy was the Cyborg, and the other guy was definitely Ezio. Those have to be the inspirations. I don't know, the Cyborg guy could just be anything, but the first guy had to be based off of Robin Hood, and the last guy had to be based off of Ezio from Assassin's Creed, because I was like, that's Robin Hood, that's just a random cyborg guy, and that's Ezio. Just different colors and obviously, faces. They don't look like those characters, but I'm like, that's Robin Hood and that's Ezio for sure. So, looking forward to seeing who they end up going up against. I don't know, based on who we have Penny, Pyrrha, and then Sun left from our hero teams, and then we have these 3 random guys, and obviously Yang and Mercury fought in this episode. And now I'm wondering if we even get to see them fight. I'm sure we will, because even though this episode ended in a crazy way, it might not be the next episode, which I don't think is for like 2 weeks or something, unfortunately. But, great way to end it. This is kind of their, only 2 weeks, but it's kind of their version of like a mid-season finale. So definitely a great episode to end things on for a couple of weeks. But it might not be the next episode, but probably the one after. They'll get back to the tournament and we'll see these other characters fight. But this one was really great with Yang versus Mercury. Very awesome. It was pretty awesome. It was pretty cool. It was about as cool as I expected it to be. And then basically it's pretty much every fight with Yang, the enemy gets the upper hand. He was super cocky. Normally it's like, all right, we beat her, and then she comes back. But he was just like, yeah, he fixed his cone. Was like, oh, is that dust? Let me get that off. And then of course he gets his butt kicked. But it was an awesome fight. I was surprised they didn't do the terrain thing. It's basically like you're in the octagon now, and if you get knocked off, you lose. And he had a real awesome moment when he used his boots to shoot himself back up like a jet boost. That was actually pretty sweet. That was actually one of my favorite moments, even though it was just like he basically just shot off the ground. It's the same as if he shot off the ground, but he was in midair, so kind of looked cooler. But we got to see him control his blast, which we saw before during the fight with Coco and Yatsuhashi, but it wasn't as much of a focus. It was still kind of the same thing, but it wasn't on such an epic scale where he shot like a bunch all the way around himself and everything, and then they just, pile onto the enemy. Like, it was just like a bunch of missiles coming straight down. It looked really cool. I was like, that's very awesome that he has that type of control. And then, of course, when he loses, they do that focus where he gets that final hit and he kind of glows gray for a little second. And at first, when I first went through it, I was like, oh, that was like his aura basically shattering. In a sense, that's what I was thinking, so I was totally wrong. But after reading the comments and watching it again, it made sense that it was his semblance. And I'm pretty sure it was him. I don't think it was Emerald. Although, excuse me, it was a little weird that she wasn't shown in this episode until, the very end, because they had sent her in the stand, and once the fight is set, she just gets up and she walks away. And there's an empty chair next to her, and it's like, well, Emerald should have been right there, but she doesn't show up until the very end. And it just made it a little suspicious to me. I was like, I don't know if that means something where maybe she can be invisible, and it is her semblance, or maybe it is Mercury's thing, because something I read which made perfect sense, because some stuff obviously ties into real world things. Mercury in the real world, you can't be around it because it does make you hallucinate. It'll flat out kill you. It poisons you and makes you hallucinate, and you go insane. That's pretty much what Mercury does in real life. And the best example, I guess, is Alice in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter. That's from real life. Like, people who used to make hats, for whatever reason, I never really understood this, but they had to use Mercury for something inside of top hats, I guess. But people would go crazy, and that's why the Mad Hatter exists in Alice in Wonderland. So it all kind of fits that it would be Mercury and all his blasts. They're all silver and stuff, like Mercury. And it just made perfect sense. Like, every time you get hit with the blast, it can affect you. And the fact that they really showed it off in this episode is the same thing, but in episode 4 when they fight against Koko and Yatsuhashi, Yatsuhashi's never there. Like in that little forest scene, he gets taken out in like the middle field area, but Koko's around Emerald when that happens, so that's why it's that weird sort of question. Like it makes sense that it would be Mercury, and personally I still think it is Mercury just because of all the real world tie-ins. It just makes sense that it would be, but at the same time it's really weird that every time it happened it's like there's something that you can tie to Emerald because Koko was near her when it happened. And then in this episode it was like, where was she at if she wasn't in that chair, and she just poof, she showed up at the very end there. And it's like maybe she was on the field the whole time, and that could be her semblance where she makes people see things. And oddly enough it's not Mercury or something, but they also did that little slow motion focus where you have like the gray aura around them. So I think it was still Mercury that ultimately did it, and I can't wait to see where they take things because of course it's kind of like, it gets super dark. Like they actually broke someone's leg in this episode, which is crazy. Episode 4, somebody said damn, like Koko actually swore, so that was crazy. It's damn, but still, that was, more than we've ever had in the show. And then this episode, they're breaking legs, and Pyrrha has to decide if she's basically going to fuse, with another human being and possibly become something totally different. And Yang's, I guess, going to get sent to prison. Who knows how that's going to play out, because with, kids with superpowers, basically, they do have to have this sort of army stance against them, and it does kind of make sense that they'd have these people with guns come at her, because everyone has guns, almost, and it just makes perfect sense. So it's like, you can't have someone go on a rampage, so it's like, they do have to take certain extreme steps compared to, the real world, where you wouldn't have to do that, where you have like 8 people and robots and soldiers and stuff come at you with machine guns. But in this world they kind of need that, and who knows where they're going to take things. It was a very dramatic ending. I certainly loved it. I don't know where they're going to take this, but whatever the Cinder's plan is, it's insanely escalating by this episode. We already see that they've done a very deadly first strike to take out one of the maidens. They, of course, have all the stuff, like, it was, I think everyone thought it, but the maidens are named after the season, so of course I was like, well, why sister name is Winter? And then there are other characters who have Summer and other stuff like that, so, it's pretty obvious that we can connect to certain characters. I don't think that counts, though, because Cinder's last name, I believe, is Fall, and I don't think she would have had an issue during, like, the Dance Dance Infiltration episode going up against RWBY if she was actually one of the maidens. So, it just happens to be with everyone, all these different characters, there is one that we can tie to each of the seasons, but clearly they don't have that much power, because we've seen both Winter and Cinder fight, and they've been, kind of kept at bay, by the people that they fought against. So, in Cinder's case, it's definitely great that she doesn't have, that insane amount of power, but they're building up to some really crazy stuff, and I'm looking forward to what we get, for the second half of this season. It was just a really great tension-based episode. Very surprising, they packed such an epic fight into, like, the last 3 minutes of the episode, because I was like, man, the promo was basically, the action stuff. I didn't watch the 37-second thing, but even the thumbnail for it is like, oh, here's Mercury and there's fire. So I was like, obviously Mercury versus Yang, which was sweet. But most of the episode was them talking, and I was like, somehow this is insanely tense, and then there's going to be a fight. I thought they were going to tease the fight, but then it was the whole fight, and then it got even crazier, by the end, and somehow Mercury has his leg broken, and it's just crazy. And Yang's just like, what the F is happening? She saw one thing, everyone else across the world basically saw something else. All the Grimm coming in, I can't wait to see that happen, because they showed the elephants first. That had me super excited, because I was like, oh, Beowulfs and everything else. I swear I can the Nevermore. So I was gonna say Ravenclaw again. I don't know what my problem is with that, but the Nevermore. I can't wait to see those elephants come in. I don't remember. I believe the elephants have their own name as well, but I was like, everything else fairly normal. If we saw an old Beowulf, that would be pretty cool, like they showed in the World of Remnant episode. I think it was like maybe the first or second one, and they talked about how Grimm actually gets super strong with age, and they actually get gray hair and stuff. I'd love to see that in the show, because just that silhouette design I still remember looks super sweet. So I really love to see that in the show for real. But the fact that they even showed the elephants, who were much closer at this point, because they had to have been like almost 80 miles, almost 100 miles away when they were in that, city in the last season. So the fact that they've moved even closer and they're in that little city now, that kind of says a lot as is. So I'm looking forward to whatever happens, when things start up. And it's, like I said, the whole world is basically, kind of in a bit of chaos right now and just upset at what, they saw Yang do. So there's going to be Grimm spreading all over the place. And I just can't wait to see it. I'm just rambling now because it was such a great episode. But of course, I want to know what you guys thought about it. So please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. And there were obviously two really huge things, and that's the Pyrrha thing and the Yang thing. So I want to know what you guys think is going to come from Pyrrha actually, I guess, blending her aura. I mean, they talk about they'll transfer the girl's aura with hers, but it's kind of a weird fusion. And does that mean she'd get her semblance? She's getting the whole maiden power in general, so like there are just so many things that add to it, because she was talking about a semblance at first. That's what she thought the power might be. And then it's like, if you get someone's aura, do you get their semblance and other weird genetic stuff in the universe? So I want to know your speculations on that. And of course, I want to know where you guys think things are going to go for Yang, because I think this is actually, I just thought of this, but this could be the perfect way for them to introduce or reintroduce her mother. And it's like, look, I know shit's hitting the fan, to be blunt. And then her mother breaks her out of prison. And then I don't know how that would work, because I feel like it would be weird to have the show where they kind of split the team up, just even if one person was gone. But based on this opening, that could be kind of the theme of this season. Like, we think it's just like, oh, big battles, again. But it could be after the tournament, things just, everyone's like split apart. And that's, once again, how they kind of show the opening with, like Team Juniper, they're all flying apart in their own separate ways. And that's kind of how the opening goes. So maybe that's how they'll do it, and that's how we get Yang's mom again, and then that'll lead into Blake and Adam going against each other, which I swear I cannot wait for that. I hope that's sooner rather than later, but I want to know your speculations on it, so please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.